now at John chapter 8 and verse 42 to 47. There's a small section here where Jesus contrasts the people who are speaking to him, the Jews, not as children of Abraham, but rather as children of the devil. Verse 42, Jesus said to them, "If God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God, and now am here. I have not come on my own, but he sent me. So why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desire. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. And yet because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? If I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? He who belongs to God hears what God says. And the reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God." Here's a passage where Jesus does not mix his words. He's very clear. He's very sharp with these people, and rightly so. This is the judgment of one who has seen that their motivations, the things in their heart, are such as to kill and to murder. Take it from the top. Jesus said to them, "If God were your Father, you would love me." Remember, they've recently said in the last statement, as a protest against what Jesus was saying, Jesus was accusing them of not being truly Abraham's children. And interestingly enough, I think the passage here indicates that, not as some people think, the illegitimacy of Jesus was being thrown at him because he was born of the Virgin Mary. I don't think it's anything to do with that at all myself. I think that here we're being shown that these people, although they claim to be the children of Abraham, are not really his children, not genuinely his children. There's shades here of the whole idea of Ishmael. True, because Ishmael was a child of Abraham, but didn't have the characteristics of Abraham in the sense that Isaac did. And in this sense that it was well known that Abraham had a child who was not legitimate and illegitimate children. We're not illegitimate like that Ishmael character. Although born physically of Abraham, we don't show any true characteristics of Abraham. We're not like that at all. So they knew exactly what Jesus was getting at here. And when they made their protest, they're basically saying, no, we're not like Ishmael. We're not like those people who claim a physical descendancy but don't have the characteristics of the person themselves. And we're not illegitimate. The only father we have is God himself. So that was their claim. Their claim was to be on a level par with Jesus. Since you are claiming fatherhood with God or sonship with God, then we can claim that too. After all, we're real children, legitimate children of Abraham. Jesus said to them, "If God were your Father, you would love me, because I came from God, and now I am here." And we see this whole characteristic idea which is carried through, that if you're the son of a father, the son carries the characteristics of the father. The father shares those characteristics with the son or with the daughter, whatever the progeny is. It's a genetic connection, one where the character, the genes are passed on to those who follow. At least that's the simile, that's the metaphor, I should say. And if you were if God was your father, then you would love me. Why? Because you would share the same characteristics that I share. And my feelings are you would have a fellow filial feeling for me, because you would then share the same characteristics that I share with God the Father. But you don't share those characteristics. And you show that you don't share them. Why? Because you want to murder me. I'm now here, he says. I'm now come from heaven. He's made this point over and over again. He's ramming this point home very powerfully, that I have come from somewhere else. I've come with the full authority of God. I've come from the side of God. The Word in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Being with God is the place beforehand, and now he comes to his own here. I've not come on my own, but he sent me. And, it couldn't be any clearer or plainer in the way in which he puts it. He's claiming equality with God, although he did not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, as we're told elsewhere, I believe, in Philippians. So this is someone who shares the characteristics of God, shares the nature of God, shares the authority of God, the purpose of God. There's nothing to put between them here. And if by this time you have not recognized that Jesus is claiming to be the Son of God, that he is claiming to be uniquely divine, in the sense that God is divine, then you haven't understood what he's saying. He's also called himself the Son of Man in the last passage, and here is the cleavage within this single being, both Son of God and Son of Man. It can only transpire that he is both at the same time. From God, with the essence of God, born as a human being. So the terms Son of God and Son of Man are opposite sides of a single coin. And that coin is imprinted with the words incarnation, because that is what Jesus here represents, the incarnate God, who is the Son of God and the Son of Man at the same time. Uniqueness in that character is what he's claiming here. So, but why is my language not clear to you? It could not be clearer, as long as you understand what he's saying. Why is my language not clear to you? Because, he says, you are unable to hear what I say. Now, here we have a fundamental and important point for us. It's one which I think has been raised a number of times, but you cannot hear unless you have ears to hear. You cannot accept what I say unless God has drawn you to me. You cannot be someone who will follow me unless you are the kind of person who God has enlightened and whose mind has been opened and whose spirit has been made receptive. So, why is it you don't understand me? It's not because my language is not clear. Here I'm speaking very plainly, but it's because you are unable to hear what I say. And that's an important point for us to take away from here. There's an important lesson in this fact here, that there are some people who are unable to hear what is being said. And I say that not in the sense of not able to grasp the meaning of words, but they cannot accept them. They would always reject them because their mind and heart are set in an entirely different direction. And part of this acceptance of Jesus is part of the idea that your heart and mind is set in a particular course, that you value certain things, that you hold to certain virtues, that you believe certain truths, that you want certain things, that you're aiming for a certain purpose, and you find that realized in Jesus. And if you are aimed in a different direction for different things, maybe your heart is set on money or fame or other kinds of issues which you might be clearly aiming at, then you will not be attracted to someone like Jesus or the words that he says. There's a kind of inevitability here, the idea that you are unable to hear what I say. Such is the nature of the situation in which this is being described. So there are those who come, those who don't come, those who are drawn, those who are not drawn. There's an almost that dreadful word we need to use, maybe a predestined kind of approach here. Something which is, at least, whether predestined or not, is outside of your control. And that's difficult for us to accept. But he says, you belong to your father the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Again, constantly we're using this idea of fatherhood, and what entails from that is the passing on of characteristics. And there's that inevitability here. And if you doubt the nature of this kind of predestination, I use the word loosely, but in the sense of an inevitability about it, it's the same inevitability that follows as a child born from a parent has their same colour eyes. It's that kind of an inevitability, that you share the characteristics that are passed on to you from that which produced you in the first place. There's an inevitability about it which you have no control over. We don't like to think about the world in which we have no control. In fact, in this possibly day and age we have today, we like to think that we can control everything, including not only our appearance, but our sex as well. There's an inevitability, though, about where we find ourselves in the world, and a recognition that there are things that we don't control and can't control, and which we are not able to muster any change about it at all. And this relationship is demonstrated in the father-son or father-child relationship, because the child has the characteristics of the father, whether you like it or whether you don't, says Jesus. Because in some cases the father might be someone who is good and kind, and that person may inherit those kind of characteristics, not necessarily literally, but figuratively speaking. And the other may be a father of lies, which case you demonstrate your relationship that way by rehearsing and performing those same lies yourself. So that's the picture that we have here. This inevitability of transmission of characteristics, because, well, ultimately we're not responsible for the characteristics that we have. Did we give ourselves a mild disposition? Did we give ourselves an angry disposition? No, these things are caused by things outside of us. We have to take what we have been given and use it as best we can. And it says that you belong to your father the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desire. So there's no worse insult that you could probably make to someone who considers themselves pious and religious than to say that your father is the devil and you want to carry out your father's desire. The proof of this? Well, he was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. And a murderer from the beginning, we see indications of that right from the very Garden of Eden, where Satan takes the form of a serpent and brings death into the world of Eden, the paradise there, forcing the expulsion of Adam and Eve. We see it also taking over Cain, who murdered Abel. And in those instances you see the effect of the characteristics of Satan being displayed in the lives of other people. So he was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, and from the beginning told lies. The old picture of the story of the Garden of Eden with the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the very first thing that Satan says, you will not surely die. A lie from the beginning. And that story that's told to us here encapsulates a very important truth. Whatever you make of the story, there is a truth to be had here, that by telling lies and following lies, the outcome is always bad. And the characteristics which are being shown by those who do that are the characteristics of the deceiver. It says here that not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is the liar and the father of lies. So he's the archetype liar here. Father of lies, archetypical, which means that he is the one who you look to as being the quintessential element of the one who represents lies and lying. Presumably, quite obviously, because he was the person who lied very first in the Bible. No one else beats him to it. The originator of lies, the father of lies, and from him all lies proceeded afterwards. And yet, because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. There's a contrast, there's an irony here. And the irony is such that the father of lies, the devil, is believed and followed, but I tell you the truth, and I am not believed and not followed. And thus it ever was. Thus it ever was that people who tell the truth are not always believed, and people who tell lies are very often believed. And very often the world is deceived by many, many things. It's therefore incumbent upon us to be able to be wise enough to distinguish between truth and lies becomes very important, because then you won't be led astray and you will not end up in a bad place. Anyone who follows the truth will end up in a good place, and those are the very best place that you could end up in. And those who follow lies will always end up in a bad place. That's why truth and lies are so important to distinguish, because they determine the end point where you end up at. So, yet because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. And the irony here is that the truth teller is not believed. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? What's that about? Well, the reason why they claim not to believe Jesus is because he's a reprobate, he's a sinner, he's someone who is not to be trustworthy. He is someone who has broken the Sabbath law, continually breaks it, teaches other people to break it too, and therefore he's a sinner. He's not the Messiah. And we see that kind of attitude today in vilification. Whenever you have someone who might speak the truth, very often those who want to bring that person down, they vilify them. In other words, they turn them into villains. They throw muck and dirt at them and their reputations so that people cannot distinguish between whether they're good or bad. It's been a common tactic from this day. It's a common tactic today. You find that good people are vilified even though they tell the truth, and because they might contradict today's narrative. Yeah, because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me, and don't believe me because you've accused me of being a sinner, but can any of you prove me guilty of sin? And of course the answer to that rhetorical question is no, you can't. So if you can't prove me guilty of sin, because there's nothing that I have done which is sinful, I've explained to you the Sabbath, then if I'm telling the truth, why don't you believe me? There's a logical inevitability here. I tell the truth, consequence, you need to believe what I say. Why? Because it is true, and because following the truth leads to the best possible outcome in every case. But if I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? Because you don't believe me. Well, says Jesus, here is the explanation. Here is the answer. He who belongs to God hears what God says. And consequently, and on the other side of the coin, he who does not belong to God does not hear what God says. Notice the way in which that's put. It's not that you believe what I say, and as a consequence, therefore, you belong to God, but rather you belong to God, and therefore you hear what I say. It's a cart before the horse thing here, and very often we put things the other way around. If we believe, then we will belong to God. But Jesus puts it the other way around. If you belong to God, then you will believe. There's quite a difference in those two approaches, and it's one that we should mark because it's significant to us. The idea that you only have to put your trust in Christ and then you will be saved. Well, it's true, of course, but you can't neglect the point that you cannot put your trust in Jesus unless God himself has drawn you, as Jesus says on many occasions, and that in this instance here, if you do believe in me, it's because you are of God already. You have your eyes already opened, not by anything that you've done. As Paul said in Ephesians 2:8, you're saved by faith alone, and even that's not of yourselves, it is a gift of God. All hangs together, and it points to the fact that there's a sovereignty of God in operation here, in whether we can hear and understand Jesus. But that sovereignty of operation of God does not take away human agency in bringing that message to others. In fact, you can quite easily understand that God uses people in order to bring forth that message. He who belongs to God will hear what God says, and the reason that you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. There's that inevitability again. So there you have a huge and thorough philosophy of life, which is centered not upon the will of human beings, but centered upon the sovereignty of God, which runs throughout Jesus' statements here. It is not, you can't hear, you cannot understand, not because my words are not true, not because I'm not saying them in a persuasive way, not because I'm hiding what I'm saying, but I'm speaking to you very plainly and very clearly. Still you do not believe, even though I'm telling you the truth. Why is that? It's because you're not of God. It's not the other way round, says Jesus. It's not that believe me and then you'll become that of God, but because you're not of God, you do not believe. It's hard for us to think that way because it takes agency and puts it in the back seat, and it puts God's sovereignty in the front seat. But that's the way Jesus describes it, and that's something we need to learn to get used to.